Now, on the huge win for U.S. President Donald Trump, the Senate narrowly approving his controversial mega bill, sending it back to the House. Voting ended after a 26-hour marathon session overnight. To talk more about the hotly debated bill, I'm joined by David Super. He's a Carmack Waterhouse professor of law and economics at Georgetown University's Law Center. David, thank you so much for coming on the program. Can you break down for us kind of the key components of this bill and the main economic goals of it?
Yeah, the bill extends the tax cuts that President Trump enacted in 2017 that were mainly targeted on international businesses and the affluent. It makes some of those permanent and some of those extends for quite a number of years. And then it adds new tax cuts that the president promised or that various influential members of Congress want for special interests that they're close to. And it then makes huge cuts in Medicaid, health care for low-income people, and SNAP, food assistance for low-income people. At net, it still adds trillions to the national debt, but it would add even more if it didn't have those cuts in programs for low-income people.
So let me ask you about, you talk about the affluent, they're going to benefit, low-income, obviously you're going to not see a lot of benefits from this. Kind of break it down for us. I mean, what bracket are we talking about? I mean, who's going to come out saying, wow, this looks great up as far as taxes, and who are the people that are going to suffer?
The people that will do the best are certainly businesses with international, that are operating in this country and others. It will give them a lot more opportunities to manipulate their tax bill or indeed get rid of a lot of their tax bill. It will let medium to large businesses get a number of benefits. Some professionals in high-paying professions, architects, perhaps some others, get large benefits without having to incorporate as corporations. For middle-income taxpayers, it's a mixed bag depending on where you live and how you make your money. You may do a little bit better or a little bit worse, and for low-income taxpayers, it's going to be pretty bad.
And talk to us about the impact on the federal deficit, debt, and inflation, some of these issues that have been brought up as the whole debate has continued about this.
Well, it is taking an economy that already has low unemployment and a lot of growth, at least coming into this year, and giving it massive stimulus. That's historically been seen as highly inflationary, and there's some concern that the Federal Reserve will feel the need to keep interest rates high to keep this stimulus from overheating the economy. In terms of the national debt, the impact here is huge. Our national debt is large. This will grow at a great deal. Again, in a good economy, when the economy turns sour, that will depress tax receipts and increase unemployment costs. So it'll go up even more then. And the real cost of this is going to have to be borne down the road when we do something about the deficit. And that's likely going to be tax increases affecting middle-class people, whether it's a value-added tax or raising their income tax.
And you mentioned the deficit in the House. There are a lot of deficit hawks. So what's the trajectory in the House? Because that was a very close vote as well.
Yes, it'll pass the House by a single vote again. There are lots of Republicans who want to vote against it. The leadership can only afford to lose 3. And what we have right now is some jockeying going along as to who is allowed to vote against it. On the initial passage, 2 opponents of deficit spending voted against it, and several other Republicans were allowed to abstain so that they got a 1-vote margin, and they're now negotiating which members will be able to vote against it this time. The so-called deficit hawks that have said, well, we have to do something about our deficit, overwhelmingly voted for a bill that will radically increase our deficit and costs. So it turns out that there may be more deficit pigeons than deficit hawks.
Very interesting point. We had a soundbite earlier from Jerome Powell talking about tariffs and how that's impacted, the Fed and how they look at rate hikes or rate reductions. And you did mention the Fed. What do you think Powell and company are going to be thinking about this?
Well, they're in a bind because the actions that President Trump has taken on trade have disrupted the business climate and created a lot of uncertainty that has the potential for tipping the country into recession. But this huge expansion of the deficit risks putting us into inflation. So we could be back to 1970s style stagflation with low growth and high inflation. And it's not clear what the Federal Reserve would need to do about that. But President Trump keeps demanding that they lower interest rates, and I don't think that's very likely when he's putting in such an expansive fiscal stimulus.
And you mentioned the word tipping, which brings to mind tips over time, which has been highly touted in this. But the way I read it, and maybe I don't have it right, is that those will be phased out over time. Are people really going to benefit from that part of this feature of this measure?
I don't think that's clear. I don't think that's clear at all. And what happens, the impact of this measure also interacts with trade policy, and every day you look at the headlines and the trade policy is different. So I don't think we really know how those things will interact. If we go back to the same old trade regime we had before, that gets us one thing. But if President Trump really means to jack up tariffs, then our economy is going to change very radically, and that could tip us into a recession, at least for a while.
Be interesting to watch. David Super, thank you so much for coming on and providing your analysis. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.